But good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us to talk about databases this morning. We are recording the webinar. It will be available on our website in a couple of days' time. So if you want to look back on anything or you think colleagues should have a listen, you'll be able to check on the website and have a look. We'll do questions at the end, if that's okay. So please do pop any questions in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll cover them all at the end. We're here today, says myself, Amy Stevens. I'm Chief Exec at Gifted, and I'm here with Konna, my colleague. Want to say hi, Konna?
Hello, everyone. And yes, it's Connor. It's said the normal way. It's just spelt a very awkward way. You can blame my mum.
Fantastic. So let's get started, everyone. So we are here to discuss, is your database working hard enough? Oh, bear with me. There we go. So just a quick agenda, what we're going to talk through today. We know database kind of management can be a very trying task, but it is so important to help us fundraise effectively, isn't it? So we'll look at why a good database is important, and then making the most of your database. So looking at reviewing that, seeing where you're at this moment, how it can inform your communication strategy, and how it can help you create pipelines for your donor management in all different income streams. And then taking stock of your CRM and the other systems that connect to it. So perhaps your email client, websites, other giving systems. Researching other CRMs and their systems and whether they're right for you. And then finally, some key points to kind of keep you on track, some take-home points that we'll go through. So, Connor, why is a good database important?
Great. So these will probably not be anything unusual to all of you. About if you think what your dream CRM and your database will do for you. We want it to improve our efficiency. We want to save time, particularly of every staff member that we possibly can. It's there to reduce manual operations, minimize errors and risk, really automate and streamline all of the different operations that you do, including fundraising, of course. It is there to enhance all of your donor relationships. So you can personalize your comms, you can acknowledge gifts effectively and engagement levels, every different type of income stream as well. There are ways to use your database to really just improve your cultivation as well as stewardship. Of course, that's all well and good, but most of us, particularly in fundraising, are there to increase income and increase engagement as well. And you're able to use not only better stewardship, but use the insights and analytics that you get to drive forward better strategies and be able to measure that impact as well. Obviously, one of the most important points there is about compliance and security, which is everyone's favorite talking topic. If you're maintaining your donor data securely, you've got 100% confidence that things like gift aid, GDPR, they're all being done correctly at all times. You're adhering to all your legal regulations and things. That's obviously vitally important. And something that's become more of a, I dare to say, buzzword in more like recent years is the topic of cross-team integration as well, and how your database and other systems, which we'll talk about a bit later, should act as like a central hub for your donors, your volunteers, supporter information, your staff. It is there to be like a central piece to your organization. And actually, if everybody feeds into that and works together within that, rather than just in silo, there are massive benefits to doing that.
I think that last point is really important, isn't it? Thinking about, you could have a corporate team doing one thing and an individual team doing another, but those individual givers need to know, for example, if person X is also chief exec of a corporate that's being approached. So it helps the teams talk to each other and flag that kind of information, which is really important. So just a couple of client examples. And we do have, I think, somebody from Peterborough here today. And we have lots of cathedrals online, which is great. So we'll come to that, starting with Adam Brooks Charitable Trust. So I worked on and off with this hospital charity in Cambridge for a long time. And they're just a great example of an organisation who's managed their database really well. So in a hospital setting, for example, obviously none of the patient data gets pulled across there because this is a separate charity outside of the NHS data. But donors and supporters can opt in for certain mailings about certain illnesses, perhaps, and certain aspects of the hospital's work. They've been very good over the years at surveying their database to make sure they're communicating to people in the right way. And a great example was when we were preparing for a major cancer centre campaign a few years back. They had already within the database, got a cohort of people who they knew wanted to hear about cancer-related fundraising. So they already had an active group of people who they could communicate with. So by keeping on top of the database all that time, really helped when they were launching very specific campaigns. Another good example is Peterborough Cathedral. And again, I've worked on and off with them for many years, most recently in 2020. But Peterborough were always very good, again, at segmenting their database. So making sure that there was appropriate communications going out to music donors or those interested in music, the schools and heritage work, obviously mission and ministry, other churches in the area, and vitally as well, the local community, because cathedrals, as we know, and I know we've got lots of cathedrals online, do so much outside of what people assume is their core operation. Hosting community events, big public concerts, etc. So all that data, and Peterborough were really good in my experience of having worked with them at maximizing their database to make sure they were communicating with people in the right way at the right time, and also mapping, what people were giving to and therefore what they were interested in. So just a couple of examples there. Konna, talk us through reviewing our databases.
Right, so we're going to go through a bit of an order here as much as you can, and I have to confess, first of all, I'm a little bit biased when talking about this because I'm a massive data nerd. I absolutely love data, databases, and research. Always have done. So, yeah. So first of all, when it comes to data quality, I would argue the first and foremost and arguably most important thing when talking and looking at your current systems is, do you have a clean, clear, up-to-date database? Because if you don't, really, before you should look at moving on anywhere else or reviewing other systems, you should ensure that your data is, up to date. Ideally, you've got the processes in place to ensure it stays that way as well, and it's all clean and clear. Because what will happen is that, your CRM is only a benefit if it's used properly and regularly. If you've got wrong, missing, out-of-date data, particularly if maybe staff aren't using it consistently or in the right way, this can be a big hindrance, and actually changing CRMs isn't going to fix this. What's going to happen is that you'll just import your data over. There's risks to doing that anyway. And then, particularly a few months in, you're going to have the same problems, but you'll have a whole new system that you're less familiar with to try and fix it. And this is, as I said, especially true if you don't have set processes, particularly for things like GDPR and gift aid, you're leaving yourself open to huge risk. The same applies to set processes for how maybe each team member inputs their data, how they're using it, and how maybe they're held to account as well. So maybe the first point of order is to look at that. And if you or others in your organization aren't sort of capable or have the time or have the skills to really do sort of effectively a data quality audit, there are many sort of third-party organizations, so to speak, that you can work with who can do that for you in the first instance. Now, we've got a baseline understanding of the data that we do have, which is great, and it's all up to date. So next, let's find out what you don't have. And first of all, it's a good question to ask yourselves is the data that we don't have a result of the system that we have and its lack of functionality, or is it a result of a lack of maybe training that we or maybe particular teams have, or just the time to be able to train people internally and keep them up to date with that? Those are two very different things. Because sometimes, if you have that lack of time to do the training or maybe staff aren't enforced to sort of keep on top of the CRM as part of their day-to-day job, then again, a brand new shiny CRM isn't necessarily going to fix that. And so there's a crucial thing to understand, first of all. Alternatively, you may have some data lacking that you may need a third-party organization as well to provide, such as a well screen, for example. So it's still important to know, how and where that insight for example, could be best used in the CRM and how to make the most of it. A well screen, for example, can be completely invaluable, particularly if you've got, maybe you're starting to get a larger database and you've done that work to understand that you do have potential major donor pockets there if you're doing this for the first time, or if you just need to refresh that every few years as well. Hugely invaluable, and just, yeah, ultimately making sure that, okay, what is it that we want to find out and how do we get it? And actually, if we can't get that, is it because of our system or is it because of, staff training? And actually, the answer to that question will point you immediately to one direction or the other to begin improving what you currently have. Our, different types of data, and there are dozens and dozens and dozens of different things we could talk here, but if we include maybe at the most basic level, gift history, not just the last donation amount, but their frequency, obviously the amount, but the type of gifts that they're giving, variance, hugely important as well, because you may have someone who only gave £10 one year, but then they gave £1,000 the following year, and then they gave £10 shortly afterwards. And if you're only looking at their most recent gift size, you may be completely missing opportunities there, and vice versa, speaking to people in the wrong way. Things like how your donors and supporters engage with you. Are they primarily a member of your organization? Are they an alumni of your school? Are they an event participant or the trustee of a foundation that is giving you grants, but actually their relationship is there with that individual? And obviously going into more maybe detailed insights, such as what their interests are, which could be assessed through things like split test comms journeys, which we'll discuss shortly afterwards in a bit more detail, and analytics gained from your website to know what content is it that your donors and supporters are actually engaging with the most, or via your email provider as well, in the same way, to assess even basic things like email open rates to certain topics. This can provide really valuable insights into actually what your donors are interested in, and to provide tailored comms. So I would always I like to just ask yourself, now that you know what you do have and what you don't have, do you think that you could steward all of your donors better if you gave them more of the content that they are most interested in, and that that they're engaging with the most? Now, of course, the answer is going to be yes in almost every single situation. So if you knew exactly what kinds of content and messages, they respond to the most, the CRM and your other systems and how they work together is a fantastic way of being able to do that for you. And we'll talk in a moment about how we can suggest going through, this entire process, shortly afterwards. So now that we've got all of our sort of an understanding of our data, what we do have, what we don't have, and how to start thinking about it, how do we use this in our comms? So we go to
I think just to jump in there as well, Connor, I think that point about segmenting data is so, so important in your communications, which we're going to talk through now. So, personal example, I had signed up to a charity's regular giving program, small amount a month, nominal amount, but kind of a friends type of program. And a couple of months later, I received a mailing asking me to join that program. Um, so I contacted the charity and said, hey, listen, I already signed up to this program. I've been giving monthly and you've asked me to join it. Clearly I'm flagged wrong in your database. And their response was, yeah, we've not worked out how to segment it yet, so everyone gets the same information. And I was, oh, guys, no, it's really important. The only reason I didn't cancel my subscription was because I work in this sector and I understand some of the challenges that charities have. But it's so important because, something like that could lose a donor who later down the line you've stewarded, you've kept on board, either makes a major gift, a legacy, etc., or even just continues giving to you. So really, really important to think about how you segment your data and how you then communicate with people. Which, back over to you, Connor.
No, fantastic. And yeah, absolutely. We were talking about this recently, how actually sometimes, I think for really small charities, there is more of an element of, acceptance that you wouldn't, if you're giving to them, you don't expect them to have everything, which is fine. But, once you get medium plus size, or even, causes that are more public facing, particular, that maybe have a building or a place where your supporters are quite regularly directly in contact with you. I think there's just that nature of being able to be face to face with someone. There's maybe more of a level of expectation, which is rightly or wrongly, is there. So Fantastic. So, as I said, we've got a good understanding of our data now. So, how do we use it in our comms, first of all? So, firstly, I would say let's assess what our capability is, and by that I mean the systems that you use. So, first thing to look at is, does your CRM, your website backend, and email provider sync to each other? Do they operate like a two-way sort of data transfer? So, for example, a classic, probably most popular example, MailChimp. For those of you that use that, if MailChimp is sending an email via your CRM, can your CRM automatically update itself with stats on open rates and unsubscribe rates, for example? Are they doing that for you? Or if not, are you having to manually do that every single time? Which, of course, if not, can leave you open to massive GDPR risk. All it takes is for you to send that email having not quickly done the check that someone's unsubscribed, and that's immediately a breach. And this becomes a massive problem when you have a large database, of course, and that risk gets accumulative. Similarly, when someone donates on your website or signs up to your newsletter, is it updating your CRM with insight into where they came from? Does it have different donation codes, for example, based on the different donate pages that they use? And if I take an example with that one, because that's a great and usually sort of the easiest way to get good donor insights if you don't have, sort of a large set of systems in place already. If you are, for example, let's take a cathedral as an example, you may have at the bare basic level maybe two different types of donate pages. One, which is geared towards people that are really interested in the heritage aspects of what you do. And you may have one which is more around it could either be a religious aspect, but it could also be the local aspect. You may have two different types of donors that are actually primarily interested in one or the other, and having, when you put in campaigns out there and you're testing this, if they then go to different donate pages. So, for example, if I'm mostly interested in supporting a cathedral because of the heritage aspects of it, I see an ad or I see an appeal go out. I then click on it because I'm then interested in that first step of donating. That donate page tells me all about heritage and case studies and impact stats and everything like that, rather than everything else. It's giving me more of the information that I'm interested in, which will boost your donation rates, could potentially boost donation amounts. But if you have a different donate code that's then synced to your CRM, it will then come up saying that Konna Beeson, donated to this, and it could give them a code to say heritage interest, for example. And you have immediately, from the very first gift, got more information about someone's interest that you can tailor your comms to from that point onwards, which is much more difficult to go back and gather that information afterwards. There are ways of doing that, which we'll talk about a bit later. But just a fantastic thing to look into. Are your systems speaking to each other? Which that leads us nicely on to campaign planning, where segmentation, as we talked about a moment ago, can see substantial growth versus not using this sort of data in your comms. And by that we mean using your data to split up your database into different types of groups. So we talked about one example just then, but it could be based on giving levels at a very basic level. So you're giving the right asks to the right people, and also allowing you to do that sort of uplift every year if that's what you hope to do as well. If I've historically only given £5 a year to an appeal, probably not the best idea to give me an ask for £50. This is just a good way of doing that. But more advanced, there's a million different things that you could do. You could send a targeted appeal for a hospital charity, for example, looking to build a children's cancer centre. You could send different emails to a group of donors who have an interest in primarily supporting cancer initiatives over a certain gift size. And you can also send slightly tailored messaging to a different group who have an interest in primarily supporting children's initiatives under a certain level or via fundraising. Same appeal, different asks, different engagement, and you're bringing people into your story, which is hugely important. And when we talk there about A/B testing or split testing, a slight difference there, which is with this, you would typically send two different types of comms and split your database in half. Now, sometimes you can do this with a segment, but you can also do this randomly. And there's a lot of CRMs and providers out there which have this functionality to do this for you. This is really helpful if you are, for example, if you're sure you have a certain type of donor group that's very different to another, you may want to sort of, split test within those, because if you split those down the middle, you're going to get differences anyway. So the insights that you get from that aren't really going to tell you what you need to know. Um, but doing this will enable you to really continually test what types of content just work best if you're randomizing, within the same sort of general group of donors that you have, especially if you don't have those donor insights yet. This is a great way to just start. It could be, I know, the difference between, you're sending a Christmas appeal that happens to use a different case study over another, or a different subject line in an email, or even if you're doing mailers, so postal campaigns, even doing one with a plain white envelope as usual and a colored envelope. I've seen some amazing case studies of
Mm.
charities as well as businesses using this approach, and actually the colored envelope has yielded significantly better results, because I don't know if you're like me, you get post 24/7 and it's basically bills and junk and things like that. But if you get a coloured envelope, looks like a birthday card, you're immediately excited to open it. And there's some really fascinating psychology behind this. I could do a whole webinar on it.
It's about messaging, isn't it, Connor? The A/B testing and the different ways we can deliver something. So, for example, you might have, we know we need to raise funds for this campaign. Do we go at it with a really emotive message? Do we go at it with a factual message? And you can test that to see which has the best results, can't you? And then break that down into demographics and other things as well. So it's really helps with how do we deliver this message for our fundraising, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And the good thing with doing this, especially if you've got a system that does it for you, is that yes, it will continually provide you with insights into the types of content or even the types of interests that your donors have just over time. We talked about some, impact and like case study and content examples, but even just the difference between does short form versus long form content in your emails work better? Is there a difference?
Mm.
Every It's quite important to not look at charities as a collective sort of, just a one size fits all. It's same with any business. If there was just a template that was the one that worked every time for any sector, everyone would do it. It doesn't work that way. It's working out what's individualized and what's best for your donors. Now, obviously, just to point out here that doing this, of course, when you're doing it around particularly the time when you're asking for gifts and around appeals or in the build up to appeals, of course, there is a risk to doing that as much as there is a potential benefit of increasing your gifts, But a good way to mitigate this is to not just look at, as I said, like the comms of other charity appeals, like quite broadly, but those within your niche and your, I always say quote unquote competitors. I never use like using that term, but hopefully you see what I mean. Other, what you do as a cause, who are the closest to you that do that. Look at what they do and get a better understanding of maybe what's working for them. So you will already sort of mitigate a lot of those risks by being much more in the right direction from the off. Now, on that last point there, all of this is wonderful, but if we're looking long term and particularly after a 1 year period, all of this is pointless if you can't track and report on these findings. So if if your charity launches 2 major appeals a year and is able to continually split test, your non-asks throughout the year, if you think how much that will build up and compound, you've got the potential to gain substantial insights just from the first year in, especially in 3 years. So you should have a really clear understanding of the content that works, the interests of maybe different subsets of your donors, which can really inform really highly insight-driven comms journeys. And that will just keep growing year on year. But it's really important that you ensure that reporting and internal processes are set up so that this data is being gathered for you, easily understandable, easily reportable, easily comparable. You don't want to be in a situation where it's coming to, let's say it's coming to September. You're thinking a lot more, well, probably before then, let's be realistic, quite before then, but thinking about Christmas appeal planning. And you want to set your right ask and you want to know what's worked before. And if you're then struggling to find the information or it's not been collated properly, you've just stopped yourself from the off. So really, really important to have a think about that as well.
Yeah, and I think important to say as well, it can sound quite overwhelming with all this testing and this, that, and the other. But actually, you can go at this very slowly and steadily and do one thing at a time, and then, log that data and then look at what you'd like to explore next. So don't be overwhelmed by the process. It can be done, quite simply. So another client example, the Kennel Club Charitable Trust, who we worked with for many years, from 2020. So just kind of reflecting really on the Christmas campaigns we ran there and the difference that messaging had and how we kind of fed that back into the database. So our 2021 Christmas campaign was £5 for a dog toy. So, buy a toy for a dog in rescue. And it went crazy. It was hugely successful. And I think it was that emotive message going out on Christmas. We actually had a big push on Boxing Day due to kind of media coverage. And it was hugely successful. In 2022, we did a cost of living campaign, and the message was £10 would feed a dog for 2 weeks. So, people who were really struggling to feed their pets in rescue, that one was a lot more challenging, really challenging to gain traction on. Um, and as we reflected on it, we think it was probably because of, running up to that Christmas was just such bad news about everything, energy prices, etc. People obviously were really feeling the pinch. And those of you who've run Christmas campaigns over the last few years probably seen what we've seen in that the lower level gifts have dropped off, but the higher level gifts have maintained, which just is a reflection of where we're at the moment as a society. But yeah, I think it was the negativity. So last year we went with Dogs with Jobs in 2023 and celebrated dogs of all different shapes and sizes who support humans in their everyday life, whether that be a guide dog, sniffer dogs, police dogs. We had all sorts of dogs there. Again, people engaged really well with that. I think they enjoyed the positivity of it. But with this, we were then able to, in the database, flag what our donors had given to, and therefore what was going to appeal to them in future. Also, what we did there was survey the database, which Connor did a lot of work on. So we did a full giving stroke communication survey, looking at what are the biggest interests of the charity's work. So it was very much split between dog welfare and rescue, science and research, and other areas as well. So people were able to indicate what they found most interest, which then helped us communicate to them when we had an appeal for science. So, a big cancer project, canine cancer, we knew which people within our database were most likely to be interested in that. And we also asked for people to come forward with connections to corporates or community fundraising, which was really interesting. And people did, particularly with dog walking groups, dog shows, etc., came forward and said, yeah, we could fundraise at this show. So it helped increase our network. And we also ran some legacy campaign, which we had people come forward and say they wanted to leave legacy gifts. And then particularly something that you did, Connor, wasn't it, was reach out to the major donors. So people who'd given above a certain level. And I remember a major donor is different for every organisation, and see if they would appreciate a hard copy newsletter rather than an email newsletter. It was just interesting to see, wasn't it, what came back from people and how they wanted us to communicate with them so we could do so more effectively going forwards. So thinking then about pipelines and cross-team activity. So this is how do we get all elements of our fundraising team to utilize these databases effectively for the highest yield. So Connor, take us through.
Brilliant. So first of all, it's we go back to reporting. It's just, this is not just important for comms, of course, but broadly to improve the accuracy of your forecasting with, a broad selection of year-on-year insights. Everything from gift amounts, frequency, type, to attrition, retention, and this can be further segmented by donor type. All of this can inform the trends that your charity has and your donor types, but more broadly, the types of messaging as well that resonates across the board. And all of this can obviously inform your wider fundraising strategy to ultimately go where the money is. But aside from wider comms and particularly individual giving, if we start with corporate pipelines within CRMs, for example, I'm a massive advocate for this being done right. It can be exceptionally powerful, as I say, when done right, by working cross team, because this can enable you to find any existing relationships to corporate prospects that may be in your prospect pipeline, for example, which will radically improve your chances of securing a partnership as a way in. Often you can set up reporting, and depending on the systems that you have, again, so that the corporate whenever a new donor has a work email, so you can do this sometimes by eliminating like the usual extensions like Gmail, Outlook, etc., because 9 times out of 10, if you've got rid of all of those ones, they're probably a work email. So that might enable you to start having a look at least names of donors and thinking about, oh, okay, well, I know that they work here. Actually, this company is on my pipeline. I'm going to put them maybe further up the top of my list, for sure, and also be able to tailor your ask. There's a slightly different example, but a charity I used to manage, I purposely sent emails during school holidays because I would get their out of offices as well, which is fully public information, which is fantastic. And you can find potential corporate prospects this way as well. So it's people that are on the newsletter. They were interested in the charity. Some of them had donated before. We had zero idea as to if any of them had any connections, or we literally had no more information other than their name and how much they gave. So doing this approach and actually directly then approaching people after that, following up with corporate partnership pitches, actually resulted in several 5-figure gifts for this small charity quite quickly afterwards, which was fantastic. Now, and of course, highly valuable that all teams have a history of each supporter as well. So as Amy gave an example earlier, if you've got supporters that do like community events, there's nothing more off-putting to a fundraiser who's fundraising, working hard, asking all their family and friends for money to then receive a request to make a gift to an appeal. It really can be the difference between having a really valuable lifetime supporter and having a one-off fundraiser. And that is so important because 9 times out of 10, stewardship is better than cultivation if you can do it right. It just absolutely is. Trust and foundations as well. It's really important to talk about this because if you're able to do trust and foundation pipelines within the CRM, yes, this will of course ensure like your multi-year forecasting accuracy is better. But really importantly, this can mitigate your risk if you are short-staffed. So, for example, if you're having struggle replacing your trust fundraiser who's left, and maybe their manager has left since, or anything like that, all these things happen quite regularly. Things in handovers may get slipped or missed. There could well be a trust reporting deadline that then gets missed because it's not been in the CRM and that information has been forgotten, which could get you blacklisted from repeat gifts. And obviously, this could be devastating, depending on the levels of gifts you're getting. We could be talking 6-figure, mistakes here. So having information in here by putting M&E deadlines in the CRM, being flagged up with alerts potentially as well, if you're able to do that within your systems, really, really important just to mitigate risk as well as, taking stock of those opportunities that we talked about. Now, moving on to taking stock of your CRM and other systems. So we talked about, all the different types of data that we have, that we want, how this works maybe within our comms journeys and our wider teams. So does your current platform actually enable you to do everything that you need and want already? Really, really important to think about that. So I would always suggest, first of all, is to think backwards. But that, I mean, not to focus on, oh, we would like to do this, but we're not sure we can. This might affect this, that, and the other. Don't start the process with that. Focus on everything that you believe you need and want in a CRM that would make the biggest difference to your charity now and in the long term. And vitally, do this sort of process, if you will, by getting your full team to feed back on that process, followed up by managers, rating and categorizing each point. You could do a rating scale as simply as from absolutely essential to wouldn't make much of a difference, for example, because this will give you the expertise from each of your team members, so you're really knowing how people are using the systems and how what would improve their work, save them time, all these different opportunities and benefits we talked about at the start of this webinar. But by rating them and prioritizing them, it allows you to do so many better things. So it enables you to think of the charity as a whole and compare your systems to maybe other systems. It may be the case that there is an obvious fit based on, these top 10 absolute must-haves. This, CRM X is the one that is by far the best for each of these areas, and it makes total sense that you may want to switch. Or it may be the case that actually those top 10 areas that you've identified as like really, really valuable are things that your systems can do currently. And there's maybe a lack of training, and actually investing in that training and staff training and processes. And it may be, investing in a data manager or a consultancy to do that, for example, could be a much more valuable route to take. You could potentially save you money, a lot of time, and a lot of faff to achieve the same outcome. So, but also, and this is actually often missed, I would say, and really important, by getting that full team feedback on this process, people just feel really valued to get their input. I don't know if any of you have been in this situation before where you're suddenly being told that you're going to have to entirely change the systems that you're using and the process you use, and then you're suddenly like, well, that's actually going to really, really make my job harder. Actually, I wish I was maybe consulted on this and we could have worked out better ways of doing it. So it would just bring everyone together, which is always a massive benefit. So if you use this list, you can assess, the reasons you can't do things now, whether it's due to the system, whether it's due to the lack of time or lack of training, and you can decide which route you want to take potentially. So it's also really important, aside from CRMs, to look at all of the other systems as well. So your email provider, your website backend, finance systems, and all the rest of it. This is really important because really integration is key, and this will ensure that if you make any changes to your systems or even just processes, everything needs to integrate as much as possible, typically. So if you've got an ideal new CRM in mind based on the priorities that you rated, but none of the things that you actually need integrate with your current email provider, it was probably quite an easy case to see that you need to change providers, and you can weigh up the pros and cons quite easily by doing this.
Are we next slide, Connor?
Yeah.
So the wonderful AKT, one of our recent clients who Connor and I both worked with this summer, absolutely fantastic organization. They came to us at a really critical time in their development. So they'd reached a stage where they needed to grow and kind of knew that systems weren't quite working behind the scenes as they would like them to. So had the foresight, and it's lovely for us to see as fundraisers where charities have the foresight to go, do you know what? We need an external pair of eyes here. We need someone to help us work through this. So we did two pieces of work. I primarily focused on working with the team on understanding their current donors, particularly corporate donors, a bit better, and what they needed in terms of recognition, stewardship, etc. So where the potential lay, and how they could then increase those income levels. And then Connor focused much more on how do we make that work behind the scenes? So how do all these systems work together? So Connor, just talk us through some of the data issues that we worked through with the client.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, I just want to also say that I absolutely adore AKT. Like, I just love them so much and what they do. I encourage everyone to check them out. They're absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I won't go through all of the things, of course, but top line, first of all, really by doing like a full system review. So let's look at the website, let's look at what email clients they're using and how they're using it, and let's look at the CRM and how it's being used / how it's not being used. And it was obvious quite immediately that these systems didn't really speak to each other. And that was leading to, huge manual entries, actually sometimes on a weekly basis with their comms team, which led to a lot of risks, particularly around sort of GDPR and gift aid potentially. So that was a major red flag there, particularly as they were growing and looking to grow further, which, as we said earlier, if you've got these risks, all it takes is one to get through. So that was a big issue there where we sort of unpacked. We also sort of looked through their full donor insights as much as we could. So giving history, capabilities they had for data gathering, provided a lot of suggestions for data and how to get it with the right systems, and a large section on all the different types of segmentation that they could do over the next sort of 3 years in particular to really make sense of they had quite a relatively large database, and to make sense of all the different types of people within that so they could really start beginning tailoring those comms. We also reviewed what reporting and tracking setups they had internally and all the processes around that. So, and we set up various automated reports that enabled them to have really total oversight into what was happening, as well as a lot of new insights, which also helped them to understand, what they do have, what they don't have, and how they can use their data, how it's informing their fundraising strategy, how they can use that to inform their comm strategy. And then it all kind of, as we said about the CRM being a central hub, that was a really good way of doing that, because your reporting is the CRM talking to you about everything. If you can't talk to your CRM and it can't talk to you, it's just very, very difficult to have a conversation with it. We also did, confidential chats with multiple team members as well, and going back to that sort of cross-team integration and the feedback to just understand their issues and their requirements. And it was clear that there was a real desire to do more, and I think largely as well there was a desire to use the CRM in these systems, but there's just a lack of time, and they wanted more training and maybe more process to help them do that. And actually, as we said at the beginning of this as well, we said that there was a lot of manual process going on that wasn't necessary. So it became quite clear that, okay, in the first instance, if we can reduce some of that manual entry burden, we've got more time, we can then begin upskilling, training in the current CRM, then we can start putting this work together alongside sort of a data audit that was happening to make sure that everything was, data was clean and quality and up to date, which is fantastic. And also working out sort of the time efficiencies of, which processes that maybe drain the most time, and looking at the solutions to those as well from like a data perspective. And again, this is, a combination of internal training and a pending change of some providers as well. And that was through that sort of a rating type system that we did to really see, pros and cons of each area. As I said, it's really important that we didn't go in and say, oh, you're not using your CRM correctly, and we recommend this provider always. Therefore, you should just switch and do all this. That's every charity is different, and everyone has different teams, different structures. Sometimes that changes every few years as well per charity. So it's really important to take an individual approach. Now, the result of this is the teams are already now, we've been told, are using the CRM sometimes for the first time properly, and like they're really working cross team as well. They're excited here to use that, which is not something you hear very often. Alongside this, we created a new 12 months comm strategy, which built into that ensured it had the capacity to like A/B test relatively risk-free with quite a variety of different soft asks as well, but non-asks through that, so they could really start to get a better understanding of the interests of their donors, and making sure that we could sync up open rates by different topics, and starting to build an understanding of let's label different types of interests based on the different types of comms that we can do. And it did have that A/B split testing functionality in it as well, which is great. And now all of this work led to it actually informed the full fundraising strategy that we did, and which just ultimately provided much greater insight into their capability, growth potential year on year, and by doing all of these changes, not even if we didn't look at fundraising or any changes to the fundraising itself as core efficiencies, if we just make these changes, it was really obvious that actually changing the systems internally and processes and all of that wonderful stuff actually has a direct and major influence on fundraising potential, which is often missed. I'd say the last point on this as well is that one of the things we did was a quick sort of slight review of the way that their meta ads are working. And I mention this because if you take, for example, you run an ad on Facebook, it links to the website. You then ideally want to create, those unique donation pages so that you've got this, sort of relationship like from the point of launching ads on Meta to your website, to your CRM. It's giving insights because they're interested in, it could be their trans homelessness work, for example. That they've got an interest in that because they've donated all the way through from that first point of meta. Now, I say that as a last point because we could do easily an entire webinar on meta, and I'm sure anyone that's used it knows how frustrating it is when they suddenly uplift and change everything 24/7. But it was just a really good example of how actually looking a bit more externally as well when it fed everything through and changes we made there.
Yeah, so AKT, I think, prime example of an organization with an incredibly skilled team, fundraising team, who, really know what they're doing in the fundraising sense. And they just needed the tools to make their job a little bit easier. And having somebody external come in and look at that, I think just really helped them to address it. But yeah, really, really enjoyable contract for us.
Mm.
So thinking about other CRMs then, where do we go if we're thinking of changing this? What's the process, Connor?
So I think the first thing is to, as I said earlier, do you actually need a new CRM? I think that's really, really important. So that's why this rating system and getting that internal feedback is really important, because of anyone who's gone through this process before, and I've done it multiple times, and for many clients now as well, going through a whole system as well as a new database changeover can be a major financial as well as time investment. And especially if you don't maybe have existing data managers that can take on the brunt of that work as part of their job. If you're looking at each staff member based on how much effectively their salaries on a daily rate and how much time they're using, it all does compound quite a lot. So it's really important to work at your priorities and link that to actually are our systems already able to do this, and if we invest more time maybe into training, or if we can even just for example hire even a temporary data manager, for example, who can help do sort of the bulk of that data cleaning and instill those processes for you. That could be even a much more cost-effective approach to giving you what you need. So it's really important to think about that first of all. As I said, use your priority list. Now, in addition to it being really helpful internally, if you do decide that you need a new CRM, absolutely, this is really helpful to help you compare different providers to suit your individual needs, because it's not just about, as you said, every charity is different. So you may have a preference on your corporate and your major donor work, and in which case a system that is really geared towards, pipelines or low-level individual giving with limited, variability in that, for example, may not be the right system. So you're linking out all these different areas that work best for you, and you can match those to the key strengths of the different providers out there, which gives you a lot of leverage as well when you're looking for different providers. Again, full team support, training processes. It's regardless of whether you move to a new system, but actually I would argue, especially if you move to a new system and you don't have this, it's really important to instill those charity-wide processes to ensure that each team knows and is inputting their data and monitoring their data, and everyone's working together. If you've got those, charity-wide processes in place on how data should be used and managed, then everything can remain consistent when you change CRMs. It will be without this, especially what, let's take a year in, you may have various staff members leave. If there's not clear processes and clear guidance on how to use systems, it really quickly sort of folds away. So really important to think about that internally. And the last point here is on future-proofing. So just have really careful consideration on the restrictions that your systems have, or potentially new systems that you're looking at, in comparison to your longer term strategic goals and financial forecasting. So as we said, if your strategic goals is actually entirely to focus on trust foundations and large corporates, there may be entire systems which are just really packed full of stuff that you are never going to need to use, and you may be better using one system or another based on that. And it's similar with forecasting. If you know that you're going to grow in a certain way, or for example, if your individual giving is you expect it to substantially grow, you want to make sure that you're on top of that with the systems that you're choosing as well, and your email providers and how they sync, and get ahead of that before you change. So it's better to plan ahead now than overhaul again in the medium term.
I think on that point as well, it's the finances, isn't it, Connor? Because some of these systems, if you've got up to 1,000 records, they're really good value. And once you go over that, suddenly the prices start to rocket. So it
Yeah.
may be better going for a slightly more expensive system initially because you know down the line you're going to need to increase that number of records you can have and manage, etc. And it would actually be more cost effective in the long term. So really important point to think about the future proofing. So this was a recent survey, Connor, wasn't it, that you just wanted to flag about all the different, and this doesn't cover all of them, obviously, but just giving some kind of comparisons on some of the providers out there.
Yes, this is fantastic. So this is I highly encourage everyone to have a look at this. And if you maybe want to get in touch, we can happy to share the link so you can download it separately yourselves. But Fundraising Magazine worked with some other organizations to do a CRM survey. And as you can see here, gives some examples of feedback from everyone there about how they rated out of 5 various elements of the CRMs that they was using. So I just wanted to flag this as a good example of some of the different ways that, as we said, internally you can maybe start rating and prioritizing the different things that you need, and how you can compare this to others as well. So if one of these areas, say security, is your #1 priority and concern because of various issues you've had, you may at least that you can, maybe there's resources out there and insights out there, as well as conversations you can have with providers yourselves to drill into the specifics of that. So that's why I just wanted to share that because it just came out. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. So what do we need to get right? What are those critical points?
So this is the last slide here, and I appreciate it's been a very heavy data orientated webinar. So hopefully it's been useful. But just to summarize the key points here. First of all, yes, a clean CRM is a happy CRM. If you know that your data is a mess, um, conducting a data audit may be absolutely vital, as well as those processes to make sure that once the data is clean, it stays clean, quality, up to date, all the rest of that. You can do this internally. You could employ, as I said, you could even employ temporary or contract data managers to do this. There are data consultancies out there that do this. There's various options to help you do that. Cross-team decision making, as I said, get your teams involved, decide what they need, what they want, how they're using the current system that you've got as well, and really just use this to look at any missing opportunities, assess the impact it could have in your charity by changing those. So for example, if, as you said, let's take an example of someone spending 20% of their time on manual processes that could actually be saved, that's an extra 20% that could be used in other areas. So for example, fundraising, which is an obvious impact on growth. Yes, data is your friend. I know a lot of people would hate me for saying that, but I firmly believe it. If you understand what data you're missing and you understand how you can get it, now whether that's with, as we said, upskilling and more training with your current systems, or a fancy new provider that does these things that you need, you can use these donor insights massively in infinite amounts of ways. Conducting segmentations for your individual giving journeys, influencing all of your wider comms journeys. You can test this throughout, so it's not just about, it's about all the different types of content you can get. You can short form, long form, different types of case studies. Just everything is possible once you know the data you have, and you ideally strive to get the data that's going to make the biggest difference to your organization as well. And lastly, as I said, integration, absolutely key if you can do it. Having a CRM that connects to a website, backend, and your comms, sorry, your email platform especially. It's fully integrated, it's automated with those two-way data transfers, means you've got absolutely every opportunity you can to test, to learn, to grow year on year, to save massive amounts of time. You've got those efficiencies there. You've got ideally the greater assurance of accuracy in your data, which is reducing further risk as well is absolutely key. And I think in this day and age, especially when, I would suspect over the next 5 years, for sure, we're going to be seeing a lot more of AI involved in charity CRMs. And I think this will be, we'll see a lot more integrated approaches that are sort of all-in-one packages as well come out. So, yeah.
Yeah. Connor, thank you. I'm not sure I've ever heard someone talk so passionately about databases.
I'm a nerd. I said that, didn't I stand by that.
But no, it's really, really helpful to have that insight, and hopefully that's been helpful to you all as well. Let's have a look at questions. So pop any questions in the Q&A, guys. We have one on here. How many records on your database do you need to make it statistically valid for segmentation testing? Is there a critical number? That's a really interesting question, isn't it? What would you say to that, Connor?
That's a really good question. I love that question. So, statistically significant is a difficult one to answer because there are too many variables, and I imagine you're asking that because you can see all the different variables. When it comes to A/B split testing, I would say if you've got 100, you can do it. It's, because ultimately, if you're seeing even just with a database of 100 people and that's split, it's 50 and 50. If there are obvious differences, it's really up to you to see what difference that makes because it could be an uplift in donations and it will be very specific to your charity. If you've got an uplift in donations of say £1, but you're a smaller charity and they're typically giving £5 or £6, that's actually a massive difference, and that would be statistically significant, versus going out to major donors who are, and that difference is probably less valid there. When it comes to segmenting, again, I wish I had like a mathematical way of approaching this because it is so different depending on what you could do. I would say if you can segment and by that, use data to personalize your comms, regardless of size, as long as it doesn't massively impact the time you're doing to do that, you should do it. Um, if you've got a smaller database, you've probably got less data available to do that. So maybe don't think too much about, oh, I wish we knew exactly which age they were, or is it, exactly where they were in this area of, of Wales or things like that. You got also think about, okay, well, actually, if I knew this, how much of a difference probably would that make? Like, how, if you were to get that email, for example, there's a level to which personalization has, it really impacts what you want, which is more engagement and more gifts. So, but I would say if you can segment, definitely do it. But if you've got a smaller amount, start with maybe less splitting, as in, don't go too granularly. So maybe don't have an email going out to 5 individual givers here and 2 over here.
Yeah.
It's going to become far more confusing to do it that way. Ideally, you would do it in groups of 50 to 100, depending on how large. At sort of the lowest level, I would suggest it. But again, it's going up. It's kind of a pyramid you can do with this. Hopefully, that answers your questions.
Fantastic. Okay, we've got another question coming. Are there any guidelines for deciding at what point you remove inactive supportive details from the database?
Do you want to?
And I was going to say, so on that, really, it's about following the GDPR guidelines about when people have last interacted with you and when legitimate interest for contact is in place. So comes down to your GDPR and privacy policy and making sure you cleanse your database in line with that. Connor, anything else from your perspective?
Yeah, so there's 2 parts there. So yeah, the first one, absolutely, GDPR and wider government regulations on how much, especially if someone's given a gift, you have to store that legally for a certain amount of time, and just to make sure you're on top of all that. But when you say inactive, actually that can be a subjective term, and it may be that your charity is deciding that if someone hasn't given a gift for the last 3 years, you may make them inactive. There's not really any that I'm aware of, like clear guidelines of best practice on when to do that. Because if someone is still subscribed to your email list,
Mhm.
you there's every intention that they may give again. I would say typically after 5 years, this is where open rate analytics is important, because if someone hasn't even opened your email in 3 years, as a more obvious example, I would say, they're probably not using that email anymore, or maybe they're deceased or things like that. So actually, at that point, you could probably start doing a cleanse. I think before 2 years is too early.
Definitely, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can also send a survey out on that perspective, can't you? And we've done that previously with clients, is email those people and say, would you still like to continue receiving communications? If so, in what format? And that can kind of flesh out a few as well, and help you cleanse your database as well. But
Yeah,
yeah, really depends on your own policies in place and obviously the legal guidelines that we all have to adhere to.
yeah, we love a good survey.
We do love a survey. Any more for any more questions, guys? Nothing popping in there at the moment. Okay, we'll call it a day. We'll wrap up because it is just gone 11 o'clock. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning. We do hope it was helpful. If you want any further information, you want to have a chat about your perspective, contact us through the website and we'd be more than happy to, hop on a Zoom or Teams, whichever one you choose. Because let's face it, we are all split between Teams users and Zoom users. And happy to have a chat with you and answer any questions we can. Like I say, this recording will be available on the website. But for now, we'll say goodbye. Have a great day, everyone, and thanks again for joining us.
Okay. Thank you all for coming and hearing about me get excited about data.